All right, welcome to APUSH Chapter 9 lecture right here. This chapter focuses a lot on the American Industrial Revolution, the Second Great Awakening, and kind of the social aspects of America in the early to mid 19th century. Now, the Industrial Revolution came to us from Britain, of course, and it came between 1790 and 1860, depending on where you were. Obviously, the South, it came a little bit later, and it came earliest to New England areas. It's a time period where factories were built, mass production of goods, and you saw a lot of the transportation networks that we kind of talked about with the turnpikes and the canals and eventually the railroads. That infrastructure was necessary to really help the factories boom. Now, modern factories, they focus all their work inside the factory instead of using the outwork system, where you might buy textiles, take it home, make a pair of pants, and then take it to the factory, and they would sell a pair of pants. It wasn't very efficient. Now you actually go to the factory and you make all your product there, and that's where it's housed. A much more efficient system. Factories began springing up all over the place, especially in the Northeast. You're talking about places that are slaughtering pigs and cattle. You've got flour mills, a little bit of everything that these factories are going in. Now, Britain's very concerned with American competition because America has so much potential. We have all these, we're a huge country. We have all these raw resources that we can use inside of our industries. But still, even with that, Britain knows that they have the upper hand because they are the big boys on the block. They're already established. They're wealthy. And when you're trying to build a company, your prices, it's very important. It's kind of like if you're trying to build a store, Walmart can put you out of business by dropping their prices to rock bottom, taking the hit until you get run out of business because you can't compete. And then as soon as you're out of business, then they can jack up the prices. That's kind of what Britain was doing to America there in the beginning, as these American countries were trying to kind of, start off. Now, obviously, they don't run all of the businesses out, but they were pretty successful there in the beginning. You see that to really help America out, American government had to pass tariffs to raise the prices of these cheaper British goods, and that allowed some American factories to kind of get their feet wet and get off the ground. Now, eventually, Americans would start clamoring for the cheaper goods instead of buying, especially when in times of recession and when things are getting a little bit tough. They want access to those cheaper British imports, and so they really pressured the government to get rid of the protective tariffs. Southerners, especially Westerners, they want those cheaper British goods instead of having to pay for the more expensive American goods. Now, America had two strategies to compete with Britain. One of them was they improved British technology. You had these British inventors, these mechanics that came over with their technology. We looked at it, we used it, and then we went one step further and made it actually better. So that helped a lot. And we also had a better labor source. We tapped a hidden labor source, if you will, in America. We used women and children. Women worked for less because working for them was kind of an independence thing. It was a way to get out of the house and the monotony of everyday events that they've been forced upon them. And children, they'd work for basically anything. They were the cheapest workers of all. So that allowed, cheaper labor allowed them to lower the prices and help business out a lot. This is basically called the Waltham Plan. It's made famous in Lowell, Massachusetts, and some of these other places. And you had these little factory towns, if you will, where you had dozens and hundreds of women that would basically live there. They'd leave the farms in the country where they were just another mouth to feed. They would go. They were single women, and they would live there and work. And for them, it was kind of a grand old time. Independence, living on their own, making money. They'd take that money and they'd send it back to their families. So make sure you know the Waltham system. By the 1820s, you had these mechanics that had come over from England that had still, England tried to keep them at home, but they left England in disguise so that they could make more money in America. Now you have American-born mechanics who are working on our machines in our factories. And what's kind of interesting about the mechanics, they had very little education, but they were middle class, and they held a lot of social prestige because they were so important to businessmen making their money. They kind of had an important job in society. There was this sweeping of technological innovation that went through America. Americans all of a sudden were inventing stuff. That's what we do. People are sitting around, they have time, they're sitting around and making inventions. Without a doubt, the Industrial Revolution changed the nature of work and that of workers' lives. Um, you know, it that whole artisan republicanism, this equality of workers, where we're all kind of our own bosses, that's going away. It's about to be a time period when lots and lots of people work for someone else. Someone else has a boss, and there's going to be a lot of workers that don't like that. But that's where the tides are going, and they're going to have to jump on board, because women are okay with this because for them it's no different than what they're used to. But for a lot of men, they don't like having that boss. They've been brought up in a world where you're your own man, and now you're not anymore. You're someone else's. So they began forming unions, but at first unions weren't really protected by the government or by the court systems at all. In fact, they were branded illegal there for a while. But eventually, the courts would start backing the unions to some degree. And really for the rest of U.S. history up till today, we're going to be talking about workers' rights and how much they actually have. Workers felt like most of the money should go to the people producing the work, not to the owners who bought the equipment, who invested in equipment. It's the people, the everyday people working, that should get a biggest share of the money, and obviously that's not the case. Moving on to the market revolution that happens in this time period, these new transportation system that's going on with the turnpikes, with the canals, with the railroads, it's really changing everything. And in late 1810s, it helped give rise to the market revolution. This really changed Midwest cities. They start growing in population, and the Midwest starts kind of looking like the Northeast a little bit. Cheap land prices helped settle areas west of the Appalachian Mountains. Basically, you were getting it for $1.25 an acre, an incredibly cheap price. And then, of course, you had the big project, the big ditch, as it was known, the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal was expensive, and it took 8 or 9 years to build, but it linked the Lake Erie in the Midwest. It linked it to New York, and it paid for itself within like a year. I mean, it was incredibly financially successful, unbelievably successful. So much, of course, that it sets off a canal boom, and people really start trying to copy the canals everywhere they can because it's making so much money. There were several things that it accomplished. It was 364 miles. All along the Erie Canal, you see these these towns and villages and even cities growing up. It linked the New York merchants with the Western market. Now they had another place for their goods to go to very cheaply. Governor DeWitt did a really good job of financing and supporting the canal. And the gentle terrain west of Albany, New York, really allowed for the Erie Canal to be very successful as well. And as successful as it was an ecological disaster in the areas. You had deer and bear that roam these woods, and they've all been chopped down to build cities and stuff, and now it's cows out there. So it's really changed the ecology between New York and the Midwest. You have the Northeast sending finished products, kind of like they were with the South, finished products to the Midwest, and in return the Midwest was sending them grain, cattle, and pork to market. You have that huge population in the East, and they're hungry, they want to be fed. So this was a good system that worked for everybody. And all these canals are really attracting British investors. So you got these foreigners, especially the Brits, who are coming over, who are investing in our canals and our infrastructure. State and local governments also played a huge role in the development of canals and other transportation systems. They subsidize the canals, meaning that the state government actually takes part of the money and helps pay for it. It's not just a private investor saying, oh, I'm going to build a canal. It's really expensive, so I hope this works out. The government's meeting them halfway and saying, well, if you pay 60%, we'll pay 40%. The Supreme Court also got involved in a very important court case known as Gibbons versus Ogden. You need to know this, and it is a court case that ruled that the government actually controls interstate commerce, interstate trade. This kept local state monopolies from stopping interstate travel and jacking up the prices on goods. So this was very important. It meant that no local monopolies could impede the flow of travel. Railroads will come in and make canals almost obsolete because obviously railroads aren't limited by being a waterway. By the 1850s, they were replaced by the railroads. They became huge in the Midwest, especially Chicago, which is kind of like the largest hub of rail in America. And it allowed the raw cotton from the south to easily make its way to the north to where it would be processed. The expansion of commerce and trade made urban areas boom. Yeah, it's a process called urbanization. Cities are getting ridiculously huge because there's jobs there. The jobs are in the factory. So you have a linkage between the Industrial Revolution and the market revolution. One feeds off of the other there. Midwest cities became important. Transit centers are kind of like a hub. They're a middle ground. You know, farmers get their goods to the Midwest. The Midwest takes those goods and gets them to the East. So they're kind of a middleman there. New York's growth actually comes from its dominance of the domestic and foreign trade. They're on the seaport. They're the best harbor in America, so they can ship goods easily to Europe and other places. And they're getting those goods from the Midwest, and they can easily ship to the Midwest. All very, very important things. All right, so we'll finish that off as part one, and we'll come back with part two.